Hello, everyone. It's Dan Hushon, Chief Technology Officer at DXC, and I am joined today on the DXC Tech Talk by Carlos Lopez-Abadia and by Mahesh Shah. Today, we're going to talk about one of the really interesting edges of digital transformation, which is specifically where IT processes come forward and intersect with the new digital business. And we know that that's an area of massive amounts of friction within the landscape. And so I'm really excited to talk to these two leaders about, how do we take down that friction? How do we develop those new processes that are digital proof, that both improve the legacy business as well as the new one? How do we change the way that we think about some of our enterprise applications? And how do we think differently about constructing the new digital edge of IT, or conversely, the invisible IT that's required by the business because the business wants to fully self-serve. So it's going to be an exciting day. So we're going to talk about transforming the work we want to do. I want to remind everyone, being that this is a fully open and public forum, however, that we have to remember that it is open to everyone. So we're going to be careful as a company not to expose our clients or information that shouldn't make it out to this environment. But that isn't to say let's not collaborate. Let's collaborate like crazy. We're going to do 30 minutes in this hangout, and we're going to follow up immediately in our integrated social platform, which is called CrowdChat, at www.crowdchat.net/DXC Tech Talk. That is a mouthful. And we'll carry on an intimate conversation, see if we can bring a lot of our partners and our clients together with us in this conversation about how can we move smarter, faster, better in terms of reforming our processes so that they better support the digital business. So with that, I'm going to kind of kick into transforming the work a good bit. And before I turn it over to Carlos and Mahesh, let me just say that I do recognize that there are many times businesses are constrained by their processes. DXC is one of those businesses. We recognize that our processes very often have grown over time. Not only have they grown over time just naturally as the complexity of the business increased, but furthermore, integrations and divestitures have tended to leave scaffolding around that's no longer necessary. In the technology world, we'd probably call this dead code. But on the process side, actually, what we end up with more often than not is a set of people who actually perform redundant tasks. So even though a certain person may have the authority to make a decision, they might feel unwilling to. Or it could just be that we haven't allowed the system to catch up with the approval matrix. And so now all of a sudden, I have people who are literally just pressing approve, 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 because they're just a bump in the wire that shouldn't be there. But moreover, what we know is we have people making decisions based upon information that's incomplete, or people for whom the information's already complete, and they really don't need to make that decision anymore because given the information they already would. So how do robots begin to intersect those processes in a way that drives them straight through? And then, as we really begin to talk about our consulting edge to these business processes, we are rethinking in many businesses the way that these digital processes need to be orchestrated. There are a very different set of vectors that participate in these new digital processes. Sometimes they're partners, sometimes it's direct to client. Sometimes you're disintermediating a player in what was otherwise a analog pathway that now we're allowing a robot or information analytics to contribute. And that's really changing the dynamics of helping the business rethink how it actually matches up its risks with the pace that's necessary in the business. And so I'm not an expert here, and my two guests are. So I'm going to turn it over real quickly to Carlos to talk a little bit about how consulting is actually helping clients really with their own digital journeys. So Carlos, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Let me try to start by, as most of our conversations these days, to start with the digital transformation of what digital is. And I would like to draw a little bit of a link between business process automation, business process improvement, and digital transformation. Today we use the terms like digital and digital transformation so much that perhaps through overuse, each one of us means something slightly different. So let me start by saying what it means to me, how we look at this from a consulting perspective. First of all, consulting is focused on thinking about the end-to-end digital transformation of our clients, what a digital company is, and particularly focusing on business outcomes, starting with business outcomes and taking it all the way into what processes, what technology to recommend our clients to use. I read recently a quote that I like in terms of a very succinct definition of what digital transformation, specifically what a digital company is. And it was from an MIT fellow, and it goes something along the lines of, a digital company is one that has built on top of digital technology and digital platforms all the business process and decision-making capabilities to run the enterprise. The fundamental make of the company is those digital technologies. But at the end of the day, it gets manifested in the business processes and the decision-making capabilities, which in turn results on the perspective of the customers of that company. Now, if we think about that, and I look at some of our clients, and quite frankly, if I look around the industry as a whole, a lot of companies have focused the transformation or the move into digital on the front end and the front office, which makes sense, is what the clients, their customers see first, and also to a large degree, what is the easiest part to take on. The problem when, excuse me, the problem when you create that front office only view, that digital veneer, I call it sometimes, and you don't have the back office capabilities to deliver on the promise that your front office creates, it's at the end of the day a fundamental failure. It reminds me of what happened in many industries, but I think a lot about 150 years ago, shipping industry. Steam coming along, but most of the ships had sails on them, and of course, the first thing that people did was, stick a steam engine on a sail ship. Of course, eventually, some people figure out to build a ship around the new technology and without sails and based on the steam capabilities, and they built faster ships, more cargo, easier to load and unload. And of course, we know what happened to the ones that had the steam veneer, if you allow me to use that term. They're gone. So I see that a lot in our industry, seeing what's happening in many companies. So I want to underscore the importance, the fundamental importance of thinking through your business processes, and the fundamental importance what we're doing in consulting, and Mahesh is dedicating a good chunk of his life to, business process automation, optimization to deliver that digital promise. Now, I can think about a couple of examples that come to mind. A luxury consumer goods company that we're working with that is probably ahead of their pack on that digital front end has recently commissioned us to analyze end-to-end all the processes and the systems that support those processes to be able to deliver on the promise of the front end that they have already delivered to the market. We are at the moment engaged with them in actually making those changes to the middle office and back office. It will take a long time. It's the more difficult part of the, it's the more difficult part of the transformation. But nevertheless, without that, you cannot deliver to your customers what they expect to deliver. Right. Another example I like to think about, which has nothing to do with the marketplace and beating the other guys in the marketplace, is another example that we've delivered recently in Europe. One of the, I don't know how much you guys are familiar with the last couple of years, the refugee crisis that we had in Europe. We work with a large European state to improve, in fact, to completely change and deliver new processes and systems to manage the inflow of refugees. It makes me particularly proud of being a small part as DXC and as an individual of helping in a very small way, but nevertheless meaningful, to change the lives of many refugees through this. So it's not always about beating the next company or making more money, but really the digital revolution for all of us has been and is, and it will continue to be, a fundamental change of a societal change, things that profoundly affect our lives. So that's another example I kind of like.
Yeah, I think those societal changes are just getting going. I mean, we've seen, Rocket Mortgage, come up to change the way that loans are underwritten. We've seen certain banks undertake ways of streamlining the loan application process to make it less cumbersome. But I think we all see these at the facades, and what we don't realize is what's happening under the covers, right? Which is that they're actually taking information that they're able, based upon maybe your identity that you've given, to go and fetch from other providers so that they don't have to ask you for that information. It might actually be less error prone, taking it from another location. And furthermore, because they can get that extra information, they can actually ask you detailed questions as follow-up. And this is being done in a lot of the immigration systems as well, which is, hey, what one question could I ask you to really ascertain your relative risk? And so if I ask you this one and you answer it right, maybe you're low risk. You answer it incorrectly, maybe I need to ask you 3 or 4 more. And so these are the new digital processes that allow you to increase the variation, but get to better outcome, right? So Carlos, what is your team is working with clients on these digital journeys? Is there any question that comes up more often than not around their journey? I mean, it's always great to kind of understand what's happening at the coalface, but what's that one question that seems to come up more often than you think that it would?
No, there's one question. If you think about the what is your risk as a company, I think if you think about my fundamental belief, you probably ask yourself the following questions. First of all, if the business you're in is a fundamental digital business, because the product that you deliver to your customers is a digital product already, whether you are in the information business, whether you're Netflix or something along those lines, you probably have more urgency but less of a risk in the back end. On the other hand, if you are, like my example of the consumer goods, luxury goods company, probably if you have not started in the in-depth analysis and in-depth planning for changing your middle office and back office into the digital world, you better going very quickly, because it's a heck of a lot more complex, difficult to change the middle office, the production systems, the supply systems of, let's say, a manufacturing company than it is of a company that's already half digital. The other thing I always think about, and I tell my clients, is as much as it's important to look at your competitors for guidance as to where they're going or how far you are along, I think in the digital world, at the moment of transition that we are, it's as important, if not more, to look at the other industries or what is happening ahead of you, because your competitors may be your old competitors, not the ones you need to worry about in the new world. So there's a big risk in companies that are being affected by digital transformation, for the digital economy faster, and you should not look for guidance based on what today's competitors are doing, but who is your next competitor?
Yeah. Well, one really interesting one that always comes to light for me, we have a couple of customers who are in the automotive space, and state regulations in the US have been very, very cumbersome around dealership and how do you sell a car direct, right? But as we know, a certain company named Tesla has really changed the way that consumer direct sales occurred, and is really ready to, I think, take on the statewide, regulations. So a lot of companies do believe the regulations make them insulate them from the rate of change and the competitive forces. But on the flip side, we recognize that some really strong companies are challenging those regulations, and you almost have to ask yourself, what happens if the regulation changes in a way in which I wake up on Monday morning and all of a sudden what I used to think I had was a protected market now becomes a open market.
Or create a new capability that doesn't require that regulation anymore.
Perfect. You're absolutely right. So these are pretty fun. So one thing I also hear frequently, and I think Aaron Day over on the tweet chat brought it up. He said, many companies are still mired in old compensation models based upon traditional KPIs, but they don't necessarily take in the digital efforts. And how are you changing? How are people thinking about changing compensation? Let me just give you one view. It's really just getting started. DXC has been investing in a platform called our Talent Cloud, Dynamic Talent Cloud. And the idea, very, very similar to several other projects that are out there, is to really allow the company to take advantage of the unincorporated worker. And to break large projects down into smaller tasks. For those of you who are doing digital today, that should sound familiar. You're in small sprints with intimate teams. And then a certain rating model, how good is the work that you're doing and how well are you participating in that team? And those jobs may bring skills which also have a market premium. And so each one of the tasks or positions may very well come with a compensation structure tied to it based upon the rarity or scarcity of skill, in effect creating a market economy around talent. We're pretty excited about this because I actually think that the only way to fix the talent gap that we have right now is to make sure that the market is as open and fluid as possible to allow as many people who want to learn a skill to really understand and see personally the benefit of developing that skill. And so, Aaron, I wanted to get back to you. We hear you. I think the marketplace is moving. I also think, and we've talked a lot about this, that one of the constraints in our landscape in services, in technology services, is around the contracts and how the contracts are basically written in a way to reduce risk. But if you reduce risk too far and you don't, again, put any premium on fixing a problem as opposed to just solving the, answering the problem or doing the repair more quickly, that you fundamentally never get anyone to redesign your system so it doesn't break anymore. And we hear this one over and over again, whether it's a call center, which instead of how fast can I answer a telephone call, how can I stop that call from coming in? We know that those things are happening as well. And so we are talking with quite a few different other participants in our industry, as well as with a variety of different employers and environments like LinkedIn and Topcoder, to see what we can do to help to both emerge that talent marketplace, but also change the way that many companies are thinking about embarking on these digital programs, which in their very nature are higher risk than maybe what we were doing before, because we've probably been doing it just about the same way for 30 years. So I don't want to burn too much of our time because we have another real expert on the line with us, Mahesh Shah. So Mahesh runs our business process services group. And he really has been both taking down what would be called shared services, but also a wide variety of business services to help to understand where they can be improved, how to improve them, and then to manifest those changes at an incredible pace for our clients in a gain share model. So I'm really excited to invite Mahesh to kind of give us his view as to what he's seeing right now about this move towards continuous improvement of business processes and the emergence of business services in this digital space. So Mahesh?
Yeah, well, look, we think driving agility for companies is very important. I think Dan and Carlos hit on both of these. But any company that's been around for more than 10 years has built up a set of assets and activities that were effective at competing in that time frame, but now essentially are kind of legacy that pulls them back, right? It's the scaffolding that Dan talked about. And what we find is most of the time we're helping customers figure out how to manage that back office, middle office, front office, and retrofit that scaffolding and those assets into something that is much more digital and much more agile. And I think, by the way, digital and agile are somewhat synonymous in that, that's really what they're trying to drive towards is new ways to market, the ability to pivot and shift as they need it. And fundamentally, we believe there are a couple of things that are actually driving this inflexibility in these companies. One being process silos, the way people have organized and set up and how they operate in handoffs in a company. And that includes all the stuff that we talked about earlier, KPIs, incentive models, all of that is wrapped into this process silo bucket. The other one is legacy systems. And then the third one is just the data within your company that actually can be an asset. It's an untapped gold mine sometimes in order to allow you to go and drive this improvement. And so, the way we are helping customers today tackle those three pieces is, we've got a platform called Agile Process Automation, which is really focused on driving the improvement across those three dimensions. So using robotics, robotic process automation, which is essentially just software that allows you to manage across these legacy systems and these process silos. And, we've got a data analytics layer that uses artificial intelligence that allows us to pull out all the data and systems and understand really what's happening in these environments. So we could take a back office process and understand how is the process really operating today, where are the places where we can optimize and or transform, and then after drive automation on those things. And look, right now what we're seeing is a lot of customers focused on a cost savings model where we go in and we're really there to help them with cost and use automation and robotics as well as this data analysis to help them drive the opportunities for savings. But I believe that what we're going to see is we're going to see the shift start occurring towards real transformation. And Carlos gave you an example about the steamship, right?
Yep.
We've seen it in the IT space as well, where, think about it, not that long ago, automation came into the IT data center, and people used to take, in some cases, months to build a server. And I remember when automation first came in, people were high-fiving each other when they shaved off, 30% of their process time or 40% of their process time and cut off some of the, some of the costs associated with managing a server. Well, it wasn't until we rethought the entire process, leveraging the new tools and technologies, that we got it down to minutes, right? And in seconds, in some cases, to provision cloud servers. And we're starting to see that thought process occur within businesses as well. They're just a little bit behind what we've seen in the IT space, but the same kinds of things I expect are going to happen. We're focusing on cost first and trimming things and making processes a little more efficient. And now it's opening people's eyes to how do we fundamentally transform. But in order to scale that, you also need to change these legacy systems over time and really get to different platforms over time.
I think when you've been working, some of the stuff you've shown me, I don't know if you have any graphics, but there are some pretty amazing things that were really interesting to me. So I know from doing some very large ERP projects that very often the process was actually implemented at the edge of the ERP system in application servers. And although, it's process as code, the code was like opaque, right? And, you just couldn't dig into it and figure out what data was going where for when and under what conditions and what information would certain paths be taken. And you had those challenges, right? Now what we're seeing, right, are these transparent process engines, right? They're actually process engines that are scaling the talent that can actually understand the process and tune the process to the business because of their flexibility and their visual nature, right? I mean, Microsoft Dynamics is really interesting because it really does allow a business person to actually write out the process steps and drop that into active code. And then the other thing that you guys spend so much time doing now, it's kind of the instrumentation, right? You kind of get that instrumentation in these modern platforms almost for free. Understanding how much time did I spend at different steps, what kind of information was needed, and what kind of information was produced, and how many downstream people did it flow to, and what was the total time to resolve. And that starts to move you into that continuous improvement model where you can tell the business, hey, this month I gave you 5% process improvement. That's a day, right? Next month, I think I have a line of sight to 15% improvement. That's 3 days. Right. All of a sudden, right, you begin to shave these things and the difference becomes incredibly evident. So do you have...
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, do you have one of the APA slides, even maybe one of the ones that DXC has that you could throw up?
Yeah, let me.
Not to put you on the spot.
Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Just give me a minute, and I'll get it popped up here. Let's maybe we go to another.
While you're bringing it up, let me grab a question here. And Frederick Lee is asking, should we not move beyond continuous improvement towards business process redesign to fully take advantage of new technology capabilities, such as deep machine learning, real-time analytics, chatbots, et cetera? So
one of the things, I'll take a crack at that. One of the things we do with some of our clients is something we call agile business management. It's some of you that come from the technical world, you'll see some similarities of agile development, but it's expanded and adapted for business organization and business decision making. And by the way, linking it to the previous earlier question about incentives, it goes all the way into human resources, capabilities, and incentives. We're beginning to work with that in a number of clients. I am involved in a couple of them in Europe. And I see over the next few years to have more and more emphasis on business agility and that area. Digital has started from the technology side, but it will only, as I said earlier, it will only fulfill its promise when it actually, permeates the whole business layer and is pervasive in the whole enterprise.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and I think there's one step though that Frederick calls out, which is, with machine learning and moving towards AI. I mean, one of the things that the computer is going to be able to help us to do is to optimize across multiple stakeholders for an optimized outcome, right? Human brains tend to do fairly well on a small number of optimizations, really well across a small number of optimizations, but poorly across a broad set of optimizations. And so as we begin to look at how do we create the best outcome for people, our clients, our shareholders, the environment, governments, and all of those other elements, all of a sudden we can begin to have AI say, hey, given the ordering of the priorities that you've given me right here is the best process to flow. So I think in terms of the enterprise business, the lack of understanding of their processes is still getting in the way a little bit of being really able to describe the constraints and the risks. But I know that Mahesh will tell you, right? We are trying to drive transparency in those processes so we can begin to better understand them. Once we better understand them, we're going to better understand their constraints. Those constraints we're going to tie back across those dimensional pillars, and those dimensional pillars then can be prioritized by the corporate board. So I think those are going to be really exciting days. So Mahesh, I see a slide up, and I love it, even though it's a little bit small. But go ahead, show us what you got in that graph.
Yeah, what this is about is, there were a couple of points made earlier about, hey, you need to understand your processes first, and then, by the way, you can drive iterative improvement and continuous improvement, automation, or complete transformation where you rethink your process. And I actually am a firm believer in all of those. But I do believe that you really need to understand how your processes work. And fundamentally, we find most companies don't really understand how things operate. They think they do, but then when we show them this data, what you're seeing here in the top right is actually the type of maps that we generate. We tap into their log data across the apps that they use to support their process, and we can create this rich diagram that shows us how the process works, the variations in their process, and there's a lot of rich analytics behind this that allow us to really dig into certain parts of the process, understand durations, understand timeframes, volumes. Because sometimes what we find is that, hey, if you knock out one of these steps and automate just one of these steps, you're going to hit 90% of the pain point across the entire process.
Yeah, the downstream impact can be huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a huge impact. Versus a lot of times when they don't understand it, they're automating the wrong things. And then, by the way, once they really get what's occurring, we find they start looking at changing policies, approval matrices, all kinds of different things that actually don't even require automation, but are process tweaks. And then after that is when we typically see people start really trying to reimagine the entire process. But it usually starts with this first step where they really get a basis of understanding of how things operate. before they take the next couple of steps.
That's awesome. I mean, this is absolutely it. I mean, if you can understand where the intensity of your processing is, how long it's taking you, what the exception cases are, right? Then all of a sudden, I really think that you can redesign corporate policies. You can bring them through corporate risk. You can manage that risk. You can greenline certain things that flow with very low risk through the environment, so they have a straight through process, all kinds of interesting things. So I'm really excited. I want to do this for more and more clients, because I do believe this is probably the next piece of friction that many customers are going to move, as they move from what I'll call their initial digital experiments to really trying to run an at-scale digital business. So I know we're running out of time, and I want to move us over to the crowd chat as fast as I can. I want to really thank Carlos and Mahesh for joining me here, and move them over now into our social landscape. As we wrap up, our next DXC Tech Talk will be February 20th, where we are going to dive a good bit deeper into the technical talent. Technical talent in the new digital world, the new small teams, the tribes and guilds, the product managers, designers, and engineers that are part of XP. These are the new discussions about who, with what skill and how they work as a team to create the outcome. And so I'm going to have Mike Trusty, Faisal, and Jerry come in and talk to us. So thank you all for your attention. This will be on YouTube very shortly, and I will see you in just a few minutes on crowdchat.net/DXC Tech Talk. Please join us for the remainder of the conversation.